Hello from wherever you're located, and welcome back to Flashback to the Track show that takes you back to the track even if you weren't there, because no one was there. I'm your host, James, with Mark. What's up, Mark?
Oh, just hanging out, keeping my social isolation distance from everyone, and in my office, just chilling, hunkered down, ready to talk about those dang cheatin' Toyoters.
Oh, man. Why you gotta be like that? You're not from Kentucky where them Toyotas are built. That's where a Camry comes from.
But in all seriousness, I love Toyota. So really excited to take some time to talk about Toyota's entrance to NASCAR. Just some of the best moments of Toyota being in NASCAR. But there's one caveat. These moments don't include Joe Gibbs Racing or Joe Gibbs Racing affiliated teams. So there will be no Barney Visser Furniture Row Racing talk in this one.
Yeah, no, none of that Kyle Busch or any of those weird Tony Stewart facts. I'm sorry, people. We're going to strictly talk about TRD, Toyota Racing Development, the flagship of Toyota's motorsports program from Toyota themselves. So we're going to deep dive kind of into these topics and more or less how they related to us and our kind of emotions behind it, or just perspectives and, just our hot takes. So let's dive into it, Mark. I think your favorite Toyota memory to me, and I think it's the greatest opinion ever, it's always about Gen 4 bodies. They are the best looking ones. And now when Toyota came into the Cup Series in 2007, that was the most fire looking Camry I can remember.
It was awesome. The Gen 4 Toyota was incredible. I thought it was beautiful. I've posted it a couple times on my Twitter account. People have been kind of 95% think it's great, and other people I think it's ugly. But you're always gonna have a few people that don't like it because preferences are preferences. But I think it's amazing. I thought it was so beautiful. It was just such a sleek looking design. The nose looked really good. Not sure it really looked a lot like a real Camry, but come on, do these cars look like the real cars are supposed to be? Not really. But the fact that we only ever got the Camry Gen 4 body for 20 races just makes me really sad. So, it's too bad. Well, I guess if you include the shootout and the all-star events, it would be 38. So, 38 races altogether, so it would be 22. So we got 22 races, but, sad that we only got that one season.
We had many seasons, though, in the Xfinity Series, and many seasons of ARCA and Canon competition with that body style, though. So, we saw a lot of old ones. I always thought it was cool. And that's another thing, too, that I think we should transition right now to the topic. The way it looks, it doesn't look like a Toyota Camry, so what? And a big thing I think a lot of people narc on about the Toyota Camry is that's a 4-cylinder hybrid or whatever motor. Ain't no V8. So what? Chevy Luminas never came with V8s either. They came with really bad motors.
Yeah, and Toyota
Motors.
Camrys also, don't have window nets, and you can turn your head when you're sitting in one, and other things as well. So
it's got passenger seats,
has
that's
other seats
feature.
in it, has cup holders and a radio.
Air conditioning. Yeah.
Yeah, so
amenities.
All things that aren't on stock cars. But we won't get into that debate. So Gen 4 Toyota bodies, but looking at 2007 as a whole, I guess it's not the chronological place to start, but it's a good place to start because you really saw TRD's first entry into NASCAR Cup and at the time Busch Series Racing, now the Xfinity Series. And they provided all the motors to the teams. They were TRD motors. And a lot of manufacturer support to Michael Waltrip Racing, which is a brand new Cup Series team fielding 3 full-time cars, Bill Davis Racing with 2 full-time entries, and Red Bull Racing with 2 full-time entries with a rookie driver and, one pretty a veteran driver, but still somewhat unproven in NASCAR, Brian Vickers. So the crazy thing about that season, too, is going to the Daytona 500, they only had 2 cars that were going to be guaranteed to make that field. One was Dale Jarrett, only because he had the Champions Provisional. And Dave Blaney's car was the only car actually locked in points. They were in the top 35 in owner points. So, as you can imagine, things didn't go too well. They missed a lot of races. I think the 500... I know all 3 Michael Waltrip cars were in it, and then Dave Blaney, because both Red Bull cars missed it, and Jeremy Mayfield missed it in the 36 car. So there was only four Toyotas out of the 8 that there should have been in that race. And then they DNQ'd for so many races, and it was just not a great season. And if you listen to the Dale Jr. download with Doug Richard, he actually talks about why they were so bad. And he said because the motors were so bad on short runs. It took so long for the motor to get going that they missed so many races in qualifying. He's like, do you really think we would miss races in qualifying with like all this money and Brian Vickers is our driver, and we would just have no speed, right? And once we got into a race and a long run, we were so fast. We'd lead so many laps, but on short runs, we were terrible. So,
and that's the fact. Fans, if you really want to, look up some of these races from 2007, especially early on, and watch some of the qualifying shows, because the top 35 rule was a brutal rule, especially for Toyota for those first 5 races in 2007. A lot of missed DNQs, and then it just continued, because when you're in that hole in the points and you can't make races, you're not climbing out of the hole, so you're just getting deeper and deeper, and it hurt a lot of the teams. Like, I know, for example, like, to me at the time, Bill Davis Racing was the team that was the face of Toyota in the Cup Series, and you had the polar opposites of success, like Dave Blaney making races, running decent in his Camry, and in Mayfield struggling to make races, and just he's either there or he's not, and it was just crazy to see.
Yeah, Dave Blaney ended up kind of being their flagship driver that year, which I don't think was really what was meant to happen. But he actually won their first ever pole in the Busch Series at Fontana, which is the second race of the year, driving for Braun Racing. And then he won their first Cup pole as well at New Hampshire later in the year. Sat on the pole, led the first 30 laps, and then ended up getting caught a lap down. He finished 29th. And that was kind of cool because it was a COT race as well. And like Toyota's COT program was like not good. Everyone's COT program was not good though.
Yeah,
like, it was just that first year of the COT was horrible. I think Kyle Busch kind of said it the best when he won the first ever COT race and said this car's terrible to drive. It's awful in victory lane. And that obviously led to nothing because we had like 4 more years of the COT. But it was a tough season, for Toyota, and especially with Red Bull, like not qualifying. And then, man, Red Bull struggled into 2008 and 2009. And a lot of that was due to like drivers' error, like just having drivers that weren't
their
great.
driver lineup was never an experienced driver lineup that, especially for Vickers needed a true teammate. He was always like that teammate that had to coach a rookie driver. He never had someone to lean on as a true teammate. Maybe like Mike Skinner when he was like doing R&D. But like beyond that, yeah. Or Bill Elliott, because he did R&D for them too.
He did, crazy. Yeah. They actually entered 3 races with a Dodge at the end of 2006 and didn't qualify for any of them. So Bill Elliott failed to qualify for 1, and then Allmendinger failed to qualify for 2. So in fact, AJ Allmendinger didn't make his debut in 2007 until the 5th race at Bristol. He failed to qualify for the first 4. So because he just didn't have any experience. And you're coming into a scenario where you have Red Bull as a sponsor and they say, yeah, come over to NASCAR. When you had just torn it up in Champ Car and you were probably going to be the shoe-in to win the championship. But I think he saw what the future of Champ Car was going to look like, and he jumped ship. And in the end, he made the right decision because he had a very long NASCAR career. So, who's laughing now, right? But at the time, it was maybe not the greatest decision, but it is what it is. But that first year for Toyota, not great. Like that second Bill Davis car, my God. Like the 360 OTC sponsor, fire paint scheme, by the way. That's one of my favorites of all time.
It's so weird because, like, remember Mayfield's fire suit? He had like WWE logos and
because they had WWE
logos.
as a sponsor for a bunch of races.
Because it's like it was so weird. They all partnered with this OTC, which is like basically a hangover recovery product. I don't know what it does, but like it was a pretty fire paint scheme, and Bill Davis Racing had it across like all of their divisions of racing. That car sucked.
It was so bad. Like I remember they took Mayfield out at Sonoma and put Butch Leitzinger in it, but they changed the number to 23 and also made it a Caterpillar car. Thought that was weird. Like why would you do that for one race? But interesting. It was
cohesive.
We should really do a podcast one time on like number swaps because they're so confusing. But that was weird. And then Johnny Benson drove that car for a few races after they got rid of Mayfield. Like it was just a rough season for that team. And then like Bill Davis had like an extra car entered in a bunch of races. Like Jacques Villeneuve ran a car and Mike Skinner ran a car. Like they ran their R&D car a lot, which I'm assuming was funded by Toyota because it was never sponsored.
Yeah, and if you look at the drivers, like for example, Mike Skinner, he's definitely a TRD, research development driver, someone who's been there for a long time with Toyota. And the thing about 2007, I think that the biggest struggle I think that Toyota had was just that they were all alone. Like TRD really had nothing to fall back with to like say, okay, we have experience doing this in the Cup Series. No, like Bill Davis Racing, I guess, did this before with Dodge in 2001, but I don't think Dodge had, Dodge had the magnitude of a hill to climb like Toyota did. Because you look at the teams that were associated with Toyota, they weren't the flagship teams that would come to be associated, like Joe Gibbs Racing, who really turned the ship around for Toyota and helped TRD like guide them as far as like what to do in NASCAR.
And I think the thing to mention, like why we're talking about just TRD and not Joe Gibbs Racing as well, is because Joe Gibbs Racing actually somewhat competes against TRD, or at least at the time, by using their own motors. So they didn't run a Toyota motor. They just used the same motor they ran on their Chevys and just put it in the Toyota. So that's kind of interesting how they get support from TRD and from Toyota, but they also in a way compete against them. Although today I don't think anyone uses a TRD motor. I think everyone's just like Joe Gibbs and later on in 08, 09, there started Triad Racing started to make engines for Toyota as well. And the smaller Toyota teams like Robbie Gordon's team, Phil Parsons' team, they would start using the Triad motors because they were a lot cheaper to I guess get leases on than going straight to TRD. So
and to kind of piggyback with Triad, the thing is, it's like we look at the Cup Series, they might not have been successful in the Cup Series, but even Triad as well were very successful in the lower tier series, mainly the Truck Series. For some reason within that playground, that's where TRD and Triad really strived. I think it was either the budget or just the parameters for what they had to do to make the motor, or maybe it was just what they learned early on in the Truck Series from their successes.
So let's go ahead and talk about the Truck Series. So Toyota first came in the Truck Series in 04, and they had, I believe it was 8 trucks that season, spread between 4 teams that were all fully supported by Toyota. So Toyota gave those teams a lot of money. In fact, really got in touch with teams and convinced them to run programs like Innovative Motorsports. They ran a NASCAR Busch Series program for years and then left the Busch Series after 03 and did a 2-truck effort. It was actually the only season they ran that truck effort. Those trucks got bought out by other teams at the end of the season. And then obviously Bill Davis Racing had a 2-truck effort with the 5... No, wait, what were they? They were the 22 with Bill Lester, and the 23 was a part-time truck.
Yes.
And then it ended up being full-time with multiple drivers, I think, by the end of the year. And then there was Bang Racing, also only existed for 1 year. They fielded Travis Quapple in the 24, Mike Skinner in the 42. And
what's funny with Bang is actually Larry McReynolds was a partial like component of Bang Racing. He was like a 3-person effort, and Larry Mc was one of those people.
And then I think the final one was David Rudiman in the 17 truck for Darrell Waltrip Motorsports. And then Darrell Waltrip actually ended up buying one of Innovative Motorsports trucks at the end of the season and ran a 2-truck effort starting in 05. So they really, right away, were super competitive. Like when they came into the Truck Series, like they were so good. Travis Quapple didn't win until Michigan in the middle of the season. Like that was the first time they ever won. But he finished second at Daytona. Like they were in the top 5 every race, very competitive. Bill Davis started bringing extra trucks to the track, and you just saw a lot of veteran drivers in these Toyotas. There were very few young, up-and-coming drivers other than, well, David Rudiman wasn't young, but he was an up-and-coming driver, and then also Robert Huffman in the 12 truck. He was kind of an up-and-coming driver. Everybody else was veterans. Travis Quapple was the reigning champion, and he got picked up by Bang Racing because I guess the owner of Express Motorsports, Dave Fuge, was like, we're getting rid of Travis before the end of the 2003 season, and then he won the championship, and then we're still getting rid of him. So he got scooped up by Bang, and he had a very good season, and he ended up in the Cup Series in 05. So, it was a weird year, man. 2004 was cool. Just seeing those Tundras, like, man. Oh, sorry, then Germain Racing was the other team. I forgot to mention, with the 30 truck. And did they have the 9 truck that year? I think it was just the 30.
It was just the 30, but that year they actually had Todd Bodine the whole season. It was their first year with Todd.
Yeah, and that was like Todd was like tearing it up. Like you could
Oh
really
yeah.
see that the trucks were going to be where he was going to make the rest of his living. But man, Todd Bodine's career was so interesting.
It is. The Onion has had the most interesting career, so impactful in the truck series. And I feel like not only that, you look at also Mike Skinner as well, Johnny Benson. They were drivers who were in the Cup Series a year prior and making that career transition into the Truck Series very well. And they found stable rides with these Toyota teams. Like Todd Bodine raced with Germain for several years, basically till the team was gone. Johnny Benson raced with Germain almost until his final year, and then didn't sign with the team again. To me, it showed that Toyota wanted to bring experience and not youth and like this vibe. They understood what they were going into in the Truck Series and how serious it was. And you could tell by the driver lineup they're taking that seriously. But not only that, by using specifically Darrell Waltrip in this whole key figure of the Truck Series, because Darrell Waltrip was a key marketing tool in 2004 when Toyota first broke in to really talk to the fans and be that voice for the brand to NASCAR fans. And it helped break down a lot of barriers and a lot of hesitation fans had for this foreign brand and its foreign namesake to come into an American sport. It was a lot of people kind of didn't like Toyota for coming in, and that was a huge key in that relationship and building that trust for the fans, was having a face like Darrell Waltrip be that ambassador for this brand.
And you speak about the sort of hesitation of people. I remember in 2006, I went to my first ever NASCAR race. It was the truck race in Michigan. Johnny Benson won that race. It was his first ever Truck Series win in a Toyota. And we were waiting in line for the tram. And I remember just my cousin was talking to some people behind us, and he was like, yeah, I love Johnny because he's a Michigan boy, but I just wish he wasn't driving one of those damn Toyotas. And my cousin just looked at me, he's like, they build them in Kentucky, right? It's basically, it employs so many Americans. It's like, yeah, but it's not an American name. And I'm like, I've never understood why that would be an issue for people. I know that I grew up in Canada, so we're a patriotic people, but we have people like that too, I assume, who probably would be upset with a foreign brand coming in, and people who are very nationalist. And that's not using the term nationalist in a bad way. It's just saying you love your own country, and that's great. But when the company has been so embedded in your country for so many years, I don't see what the issue is. Why did that upset you? As of this day, Toyota employs over 130,000 Americans, which is more than GM. So, you and I, we've been to Toyota's North American headquarters in Plano, and those people are pretty happy working there. So they seem to be,
I'm pretty sure they're not drinking any Kool-Aid.
The media food was Pizza Hut, so they're they got points in my book.
They just seem like a great company. They have their heads on their shoulders. They know how to treat people. It's a different culture or mentality or setting that maybe this company comes from, but it doesn't mean that it's represented the same way in every facet of the company. Okay. Toyota America is very American. I mean, it's been America. So,
and this was also a time when Dodge was owned by Daimler Chrysler, which is a German company, and nobody cared about that. So,
yeah, no one cared when it came down to it becoming Fiat, which was an Italian company.
It's they were also your enemies in World War II. So,
I just don't get it. I think, I don't know, people just wanted to hate. And I think another thing too, you said before, the on-track success that Toyota showcased from the start, literally from Daytona, I think that might have gotten under some fans' skin. They don't like someone beating up on the Chevys and them Fords and them Dodges, and they didn't like that. And also, I think this was also good too, in the other sense, we take it away from the fans and we look back to the manufacturers. The amount of money the manufacturers started pouring into the Truck Series again, because Toyota was back and involved, was big, because they wanted to beat Toyota, but also not only on track, but with the most brand recognition and the most brand exposure within the series. There was a big competition between that. I mean, remember Express had the Silverado Express, and then Morgan Dollar had the Silverado, and then had all the Cup drivers who were Chevy Cup drivers involved in it too as well. it was pretty cool at the time. I think that was like great competition that was brought from just Toyota coming in.
It was a great time in the truck series with all the factory money going in, like Bobby Hamilton Racing from Dodge, and like there was just like God, like it was just so great because everybody wanted to sell pickup trucks, and it did a really good job. So that was a fun era, and Toyota was successful right out of the gate, and they're still probably the guys to beat in the truck series and have been ever since. Todd Bodine got 2 championships with them. Eric Jones, William Byron did not win the championship.
Johnny Benson won a championship.
If there was no playoff format, he would have. But Johnny Benson as well. Like, yeah, they've been very good, and they've done a great job. So 2007 in Cup was a little bit tough. Like, they won their first title in 2006 with Todd Bodine in the truck series. But let's do more of a deep dive. So we've talked about Cup, talked about trucks. Let's talk about Xfinity a little bit. So they also came into Xfinity in 2007. I mentioned Dave Blaney's pole, but they only had 4 cars the whole season fielded as Toyotas. It was Michael Waltrip Racing's number 99. Although I think he did a part-time car at the end of the year, the 00, in a few races for Michael McDowell. Yeah, and then they had Braun Racing. So the 38, Jason Leffler, and then the 10 and the 32, which were shared by many Cup drivers. Dave Blaney was supposed to do the full season in 2007, but he kind of fell out of contention for the championship, so they rolled with multiple drivers. So I think Mike Bliss drove one of those cars. I remember Michael Waltrip driving one. Just a bunch of different drivers, and that's a team that, I remember them always being like pretty stout in the series as like the standalone team that wasn't affiliated with the Cup team. But I guess they were in terms of engine leases and whatnot. But once Toyota came in, they kind of backed them, gave them a bunch of money, and they had great sponsorship, great clips, ABF, UPAC, like sponsors you still see in the series now. Fraternal Order of Eagles, they still sponsor Justin Haley. So it was an interesting year. They didn't have success right out of the gate. It was tough for them, kind of that learning curve. But Jason Leffler came in clutch.
Yeah, and Jason Leffler, honestly, all season long was pretty clutch. He had good runs. It just mainly came at the standalone events, the events where they kind of weren't intermingling with Cup Series drivers, and the field was mainly Xfinity or Busch Series drivers at the time.
And that was common at the time. Like, those guys would shine, right, when like there's no Cup drivers in the field. So except Carl Edwards.
He's just a freak of nature, man. But even at this time, like, it was to beat those guys, it was big, and they would even come to some of those standalone events. Case in point, IRP. You had to contend with Greg Biffle and Carl Edwards at the end of that race. Okay, the Roush duo battling for the lead. Here comes Jason Leffler, who pitted on lap 60 for some scuffs and has like 50 lap newer tires than the leaders. Comes by him, takes the lead late in that race, which was funny because he actually had to door slam fellow TRD driver David Rudiman to get up to second place, but no harm, no foul, I guess. Though Rudiman wasn't happy after the race. Leffler actually ended up going past Biffle, taking the lead and the win. That was Toyota's first ever victory in what was then the Busch Series, and it was a big deal. And actually at the moment, which is funny, Mark, because you don't think about it in the moment how big something is, but in that moment, everybody knew that it was a big deal that Toyota won that race, that a Toyota namesake car won that race.
I remember being massive. I remember we have a friend who works for the agency that does media for and PR for Toyota Motorsports, and she was telling us about when that race happened. She was at that race and was like, it was incredible. She's like, it was horrible working for Toyota. We're covering it that year because they were just not great, but they had to find interesting ways to promote it. But that was, I remember being at that race and just saying it was great to see Jason win. And that was Jason Leffler's final win in NASCAR as well. Obviously Jason passed away in 2013. So, always try to look back on his career fondly. A lot of people say he wasn't successful as he should have been, but it is what it is. He had a great career, he had a long career. So he was a great driver. And David Rudiman actually won again later in the season. He won at Memphis, another standalone event, but he was a full-time Cup driver at the time, and gave Toyota their second win. And then in 2008, when Joe Gibbs Racing became Toyota, they just started racking up wins in Cup and Xfinity. I think, what did Tony Stewart win, like 7 races in 2008 or something? Like, it was ridiculous.
Yeah, he like won Daytona and he won them all. Like at one point, I remember at Michigan there was a controversy because like Joe Gibbs Racing was using magnets at the ends of the at the throttle on the pedal so that the pedal wouldn't go all the way down to, I guess, like not showcase how much horsepower Joe Gibbs Racing could have been actually making, and they actually got fined for that in the Xfinity series. So they were really ahead of the curve, I think, with just their power alone. And there probably was something to Toyota's aerodynamic, Gen 4 body, especially in the Xfinity series, because they were just dominant on mile and a halves. Every track that like aero was important, they were there. But I think the biggest thing was that JGR power, man. You spoke to it earlier. Like when you've been making your own motors for like, I don't know how long Joe Gibbs Racing was at that point, making their own motors in-house, you learn things and you know what to do. And they obviously did. And they squeezed every little horse out of that engine.
So we've talked about Cup and Xfinity and Truck Series, but we haven't talked about the Goodies Dash Series. So when you say Toyota and NASCAR, people say, oh yeah, 2004 Truck Series. Wrong. Because Toyota has been in NASCAR since the 80s. Now, they may not have been in NASCAR as a factory-supported effort since the 80s, but there are photos of Kenny Allison driving a Toyota Celica in, at the time, NASCAR's, what was it called? Like the sedan series or modified sedans? It was the Goodies Dash at the time.
Grand Baby Dash, something like that.
Something like that. And he ran a Celica on multiple. Is it Celica or Celica? I've heard it pronounced both ways.
I've heard more Celica.
Yeah, well, you Americans pronounce everything horribly, so God forbid there's any sort of culture in the words you say. But yeah,
actually, the first person that ever heard pronounced Celica was not an American. How dare you?
Well then. So anyway, but yeah, so I'll say Celica because that'll make you feel at home. So Celica. And even in the 90s, there's multiple photos of several different cars running as Celicas. So, but those were not factory-supported efforts. Those were just, I don't even know why they put the Toyota decals on there, but maybe just to be different. But in 2000, Toyota officially entered the Goodies Dash Series as a manufacturer. So what that means is they went to a team, gave them a bunch of money, and they ran an official Toyota branded entry. When that driver was, if I remember correctly, Eric Van Cleef, a veteran road course driver from the SCCA and a former IMSA champion driving for Toyota. So it made sense.
He drove Supras. Those were pretty cool looking Supras back in the day. So he competed in sports car racing, not as like an official Toyota like driver, but basically as someone who knew Toyotas and drove Toyotas and could work on them. And basically Toyota took notice of this, especially back in this period of time with SCCA racing. I believe, Mark, it was not as amateur, but it was kind of like pro-am where anyone could kind of get in if you really knew what you were doing with a car. So he came in, was with Toyota for quite some time, and then finally got the boast to go NASCAR racing. But he was definitely not a NASCAR driver. He did not have oval track experience. He was a road racer.
Yeah, he didn't have the best season. He finished 17th in points, but it was a proof of concept. They could enter and, be in the series. In 2001, they partnered with Robert Huffman and his team in number 37 car. And he had fielded Pontiacs for years, but decided to go with Toyota. And he won the 7th race of the season, gave Toyota their first ever win. He won a couple more times that year. I think he won 4 races overall. And then in 2002, 2003, he won the Drivers' Championship. So he won the Drivers' Championship and the Manufacturers' Championship. And then the Dash Series ceased to exist after that year. That was a year where there was, on average, only 7 or 8 cars in each race. So the series is kind of on its way out. But he managed to win the championship. Which I think is pretty cool, to come in, and that's something people don't know about Toyota and NASCAR. They don't remember the Goodies Dash Series. Tried to actually get in touch with Robert Huffman to see if he could give us some insight, but wasn't able to work that out in time. But there's not a lot of stats from the Goodies Dash series. It's a tough series to find stats on. So
Yeah,
research was tough.
It's hard because like a lot of these older series, there's not a lot of proven content out there. You know, a lot of content was lost, records, bookkeepings. You know, the things that basically make up the data that we want has been lost over time, and it's a shame. From what we do know about the Dash series, though, it was a proving ground for a lot of future, you know, Cup drivers. Phil Parsons, Davey Allison, Michael Waltrip, all kind of came from the Dash series, and it was a really interesting series with this V6 and V4 platform for the engines. The only unfortunate thing about it was there really wasn't a whole lot of manufacturer support. Toyota was truly the last manufacturer involved in the Dash series and actually like producing like any real equipment for the teams. But I mean, I'd really like to get more information about that. But to me, this is what it really feels like, even just like looking back from the data we do have about the Dash series, which is kind of a shame, man. This is kind of it was a cool concept of a series, except on super speedways. It always looked frightening at Daytona.
They had horrific crashes. Yeah. If you've ever seen the crash of the car flipping into Lake Lloyd, that's a Goodies Dash car. A lot of people say it's Busch series. It's not. It's Dash series. They would top out at like 165 miles an hour, so not nearly as fast as Cup cars, but still just like absolutely frightening. They'd have like 44 cars on track, but it was a cool series. So, you know, there is not really a series like that. I guess we have ARCA and we have NASCAR Roots or whatever we call it now with all the different series. So that's kind of where the pipeline starts. But the Goodies Dash series, a lot of those guys were like veteran dudes that just ran the Dash series all the time. And it very much, like James said, was like a run what you brung type series. Guys were racing Buicks in like 1997. You know, so.
Yeah, the regulations were very loose. I mean, it kind of, if you arc back to what the Sportsman series was back in the day, it was, hey man, if you have a Cup car from 1970, it's 1989, but you can use it if you can bring it into the track. I'm not sure, and don't put us on record for saying that that's how the Dash series was, but you know, we gotta get a little more information about the Dash series. We'd love to. I think it's a really good topic for another day to really deep dive, because you know, seeing some of the drivers that were involved in it, to see what they would inevitably do in their careers, kind of interesting. It was kind of a proving ground. And, you know, there's so many little proving grounds in motorsports where drivers come up through the ranks to be at the Cup Series level. It's interesting that this series did exist for a while and that Toyota was a part of it for quite some time. If we got to go back now and look at a couple of moments that we just want to cherry pick just for you, like one or two from ourselves. Something to me that always was important was the Michigan races for the Cup Series, and especially for the manufacturers, how much emphasis was put in that race, that prestige. To me, that was an important thing, and I always thought that was an aspect that caused teams and drivers to put more of an effort towards Michigan. And in 2009, I think that was like proven well, because Toyota captured the Michigan race. And not only did they capture Michigan, but they also captured it with one of their proven drivers from the beginning, which was Brian Vickers. Mark, you really got some good information with Red Bull, because you understand Formula One really well.
Well, not really well, but like you're
foreign.
I'm
American.
I do like Formula One a lot. I like all forms of auto racing. But I do watch Formula One. I did actually appear on a podcast one time to analyze Formula One, so I had to fake it a lot. But they were an interesting team because they came from F1, which is like super professional. And if we see this a bit in sports cars, like some teams like Penske, very professional. Like if you're a crew guy on an F1 team, it's like, okay, here's your outfit for the weekend. Here's your Friday shirt. Here's your Saturday shirt. And Sunday you have to wear this. And it's very policed like that. They're very professional in how they look. Hospitality is huge. They have big they call them motorhomes. They're like houses they bring in and prefab and set up with huge hospitality areas and like espresso machines and baristas that work in there and a restaurant all brought there. And Red Bull was really one of the first teams to have that. And they said, you know, we're an energy drink company. We have to promote it. And when they came to NASCAR, they did it right. They, as far as I know, they were the first ever team to have a full-time pit crew that only pit cars. They did not have other jobs in the shop. A lot of teams at the time still had, you know, Your shock guy would also be the tire changer. That would be his job on the weekend. And now it's all like that. The pit crews are like hired guns that are, basically guys that, like, say Hendrick Motorsports has in their roster, and they rent them out to teams just for the weekend. They literally get there on Saturday. We see them walk into the garage carrying their suitcase. They pit Xfinity cars, stay in a hotel, pit Cup cars, go home, right? And they get paid a ridiculous amount of money to do that. I say ridiculous like it's a bad thing, but they do get paid a lot of money. Red Bull, first team to do that. Red Bull also, like I said, the hospitality thing, they just came in and did it differently. And it sucks that it took them so long to get successful. I really think they were probably the coolest team in NASCAR history. Like, I would argue that. I think they were just so cool the way they did things.
Yep. I agree 100%. They were too cool for school. And it wasn't just because it was like extreme energy drink. They had creative ways of marketing themselves. I mean, you talk about hospitality, not just, inside the tracks, what they're doing for their VIP guests. Outside the track, they had hospitality amenities for VIPs, ways to, engage them with the drivers, really trying to break down the sport to a different audience. It wasn't the classic NASCAR middle class audience. It was kind of like that in between of like luxury brand and upper middle class, nice quality. I don't know. I don't know. It's weird that Red Bull is at that middle, and they presented themselves with this posh, presentation and gave experiences outside the track for the fans, which was huge because a lot of brands were doing that in the midway, but I think Red Bull really took advantage of being different in the midway. And also outside the midway, Red Bull is just a viral king. They know how to execute really well. I mean, remember the pit stop in New York City? I mean, come on, that was revolutionary.
They won the pit crew competition every year. Like, they just went in and just killed. Like, they were so good.
Then they were the first team to really be like, hey, we're going to take our cars to Goodwood, and they're going to be dressed up like the way the Cup cars look like, so everyone knows what Team Red Bull is. They made NASCAR more global. They really took what they were doing as a marketing tool to the next level. And a brand like that is just innovative. And if anything, every brand from here on out has had to learn what to do to catch up to Red Bull.
Yeah, and you still don't see a lot of brands doing it the way that Red Bull did. Like, hospitality is a big part of NASCAR, which is very tough, especially now they're racing without fans, to have that hospitality out, because a lot of the sponsorship opportunities are based on hospitality. Josh Balicki kind of told us about that when we had him on. So good on Josh, too, driving that Tommy Baldwin car this week. Good to see him at the racetrack. Really happy to see him there. Too bad he doesn't have a motorhome. He had to chill in an infield office for 2 hours before the race. But
that was social media. But it's interesting you just brought that up, because I was talking with CJ McLeod about CJ McLaughlin about this, specifically about the passes, and it makes me think to like teams like a BJ McLeod or a Ryan Sieg or any of these other like smaller like Xfinity teams, or even like Rick Ware in the Cup Series that have to use those hot passes and cold passes to entice the sponsorship. You know what I mean? Like selling that experience. It's not there anymore. That money's gone. But kind of to arc it back to Toyota, and the Red Bull experience-wise, like Red Bull, like even aesthetically for their experience, had something different. The way they presented, the way the cars look, the way their hero cards looked, the way their driver suits, crew uniforms looked, everything about that brand was just different. It wasn't what you would typically see in NASCAR.
Yeah, that's the thing, is it was, like you said, a posh brand coming in, which is a very European brand. Like, Red Bull didn't really get legs in the U.S. until the mid-2000s. So, and even here, it was the same. So now it's a globally recognized brand, one of the best advertised brands in the world. And, they're still balling out in F1. Don't know how that's going to go in the next few years. I guess they're kind of not going to be the Aston Martin team. Really confusing situation over there. But
come back to NASCAR instead. Just stop F1 and
just
come back
to NASCAR.
Like, I don't care what manufacturer. Start your own damn manufacturer. Bring Tesla in. I don't care. Be so cool and be like, we're gonna run our own car. It's gonna be in its own division. It's called the Stock E Series. Just like Red Bull is that cool.
Like that Jaguar I-Pace series they have. It's like the Formula E support series, and you're like, this works really well if the track is basically a go-kart track. But anything bigger than that, it does not work very well.
Yeah, I don't know how it would work because like the car is just going to be so freaking heavy with all the batteries, and I don't know how the forces and tire management, especially at such a abrasive track like Darlington, could physically last.
It would be interesting, but let's not talk about electric cars in NASCAR because
No.
that'll really upset some people.
Well, if anybody's going to do it first, it's Toyota too. So,
but we started by talking about the Michigan race, and I think what we wanted to arrive at was like Brian Vickers winning for TRD in Michigan, which is the home of General Motors and Ford, was pretty spectacular.
Yeah, and we don't say Daimler Chrysler because Plymouth is pretty far away. So, as we arc to that point and allude to that, that was also a big year for Red Bull to me because they made the chase, and for Toyota that was like big because that was like a non Joe Gibbs Racing team that made it. A TRD team made the chase. So it was one of the few times that a TRD team made the chase. But, you know, back then it was harder to make the chase, too. It wasn't the whole 16 cars, and if you win, you're in. It was 10, and you had to be in on – actually, I think it was it 11 or 12?
12. It might have been 12 at that point. I'll have to look that up. I can't remember when they changed it 12, but you had to get in on points. There was nothing – there's no win and you're in. You had to be 12th or better in points after 26 races. So –
yeah. And even as I remember this, they were on the cutoff line. They, like going into the race, they were like one of the teams you have to watch. Oh no, are they in or are they out? They ended up being in, but stressful because it was a season-long battle to get to those 10 races. It wasn't just like, oh, we just won. What are we going to do for the next 13 weeks?
Yeah, and it really kind of shown that, like, so Brian Vickers was one of only 2 drivers to win for Red Bull, and Casey Kane was the other one. He actually won Red Bull's second last race in NASCAR. But Brian Vickers was really kind of like their flagship driver. He was the only driver that was with them the entire time. Granted, he did miss lots of races due to his blood clot issues, which have kept him sidelined for long amounts of time, which is really unfortunate because I feel if that didn't happen, Brian could have been one of the better drivers in the early 2010s. You know, he was able to win that race. They replaced, you know, he had AJ Allmendinger as a teammate and Scott Speed. And like, I'm sorry, like, I don't diss on a lot of drivers, but like Scott Speed was just terrible. Like, he was so bad. And
yeah,
if you ask any engineer that's ever worked with him, I remember listening to a podcast with the guy that ran Toro Rosso in Formula One, and he said Scott Speed was the worst driver he ever worked with from an attitude standpoint and a work ethic standpoint. You know, drivers that just think they know more than everyone else, and they don't know anything. I'll never forget there was a race at Belgium. Hungary, 2006. It was raining, and the track was starting to dry. He argued for several laps with his crew to give him slicks, even though the track was still wet. He said, I want slicks. He spun the car out coming out of the pit lane because the track was too wet. And David Hobbs on the broadcast said, well, son, you wanted those dry tires, and they gave them to you. And that to me was like, I'm like, Scott Speed's over. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Now, granted, Scott Speed did almost win the ARCA championship had Ricky Stenhouse Jr. not, like, you know, punted him in the final race of the season on purpose, which then handed the championship to Justin Allgaier.
Yeah, I mean, and that to me is a weird time because if honestly Justin Allgaier doesn't win that championship, he doesn't get to be where he is because like the shadow of Scott Speed coming in with this Eddie Sharp Racing, Red Bull Racing prepared car is outshining the ARCA field, and that wasn't kind of fair, which is understandable. I don't think Scott Speed really had a true stock car experience to deserve a cup ride, and Red Bull pushed him to be this face, and I don't know why. I really don't. Like, no offense to Scott, but the way he acted in like the early 2010s, late in the 2000s were just kind of
even with we've seen with him on iRacing and stuff, crashing people on purpose. He got like kicked off iRacing for quite a lot while he was a brand ambassador for them because he was wrecking people on purpose. It's like, you know, just. But that's enough about Scott Speed.
It's Scott Speed. It's whatever. But to me, what really hurts Brian Vickers, because when in 2006, when it was announced that Brian was going to go to Toyota and he was going to drive for Red Bull, I thought this was a great move, and he was going to be like a franchise driver, much like we saw with Jeff Gordon at Hendrick Motorsports and Mark Martin at Roush, the face of an organization, have teammates under him, possibility of contending for championships. And honestly, Red Bull could have done that. It didn't pan out. You know, Brian wasn't there the full gamut that he needed to be there. The engines weren't on par in year one, and they never could find a consistent teammate to their star driver.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like he was always the guy that had to groom people. We mentioned that earlier. It was tough for him there, man. They could have been more successful if they had a better driver lineup, and I stand by that. Like, obviously, yeah, AJ Allmendinger had a great career later, but he was just not ready. So,
you know who I would have loved to have seen in the Red Bull car full time? Mike Skinner.
Yeah, you know what? Like, have a swan song final season in 07 as the full-time driver, run a third car part-time for AJ while he figures it out, and put him in, like, you know, put him at Braun Racing, you know?
Yeah.
Like, God, we should run race teams because our ability to look back and see what other people did wrong from the future is brilliant. So we always know what people should have done
in the past. After the fact, yes, exactly. We do, yes.
So that's what we do. We have a retrospectoscope, and we just look back and point out everything bad that people did and what they should have done. But some other stuff we kind of talk about, there's a few other ones. In 2010, so we talked about how when Toyota first came to NASCAR, it was hard for them to find teams that wanted to be Toyota teams. Two of the teams in 07 were brand new. They were Red Bull and Michael Waltrip Racing. The third was Bill Davis. He was the only guy that really had... Now, Michael Waltrip had run Cup cars in the past, but never full-time. So, very hard to find teams to go to Toyota. Then they got Gibbs in 08. But in 2010, 18 Toyotas entered the Daytona 500. 13 of them made the field, which just shows you that the way they were able to grow in the sport and have that many cars in the field, right? They had 3 Gibbs cars on top of... I think Michael Waltrip Racing at the time had 3 cars in the field. Bill Davis Racing was already over, but there was, I don't know, MSRP Motorsports had like a start and park car in the field that was a Toyota. Like, it was
Tommy Baldwin Racing had his Toyota in the field. Like, there was a lot of like small independent teams like Joni Nemechek. And it was really interesting to see that Toyota was popular with those guys. And of course it's probably TRD Triad, but
yeah, Triad was building motors for a lot of those guys, but just that they would want to get those, like, there was a big run on old Toyota chassis bought from teams like Michael Waltrip Racing. And, you know, there has to be something said for that. Like, I doubt it was just a fire sale where he was selling them for a lot cheaper than other teams were, but I think it's because those were good cars, you know? And obviously Bill Davis Racing shutting down, so they sold a lot of cars off to people at the end of 2008. But, you know, there's a reason that there's that many Toyotas showing up for the race. So... it was kind of cool to see that many, from going from like all this hesitation and we don't know how we feel about Toyota to 18 Toyotas being entered.
Yeah, and it not only showcased the fact that more people were willing to run with the manufacturer, but it showcased more or less within the manufacturer that they could grow and build more, because you have more cars out on track. That's more data you can pull from to make your organization better. And for Triad TRD at the time, this was big to have this many cars in the Daytona 500. Inevitably, a lot of these teams were like revolving doors where they'd be with the manufacturer for maybe a year, or even be just teams that would start and park, so they weren't really fully giving back a lot to the manufacturer, and the manufacturer wasn't giving a lot to them. But in turn, it's a face for the brand as far as marketability. It's huge to have that many vehicles that are badged Toyota Camry all over in this race. That's one of the biggest races of the year. So it's good for viewership and marketability as well for the brand.
Definitely. And I think the last thing that I really want to talk about is how Parker Kligerman is the fastest driver in NASCAR. So in 2019, Parker Kligerman ran the fastest race of the season at the Fall Talladega race, driving a Gaunt Brothers Racing Toyota, a lap of 205.803 miles per hour. Fastest guy in the field, 2019.
Not to be a dick, I just didn't really know what else to put that was like of current day except for this, so I just put it.
I thought that was really funny when he tweeted that, just to let everyone know that he was the fastest. So yeah, so Gaunt Brothers Racing, if you don't know, is a smaller Toyota team. They're full time now with Daniel Suarez, but they're a smaller team, maybe not as much funding. And Toyota kind of uses them as like an R&D team. They run They had like Toyota certified used vehicles as a sponsor on the car, and Drew Herring drove for them at Homestead last year. He's a Toyota test driver and simulator driver. It's kind of like a thank you. They put him in a car for a race, and to the chagrin of certain media pundits who thought it was wrong of him to be allowed to race in the final championship race, but we know who those people are and we don't value their opinions. So, they're an interesting team, but the fact that they ran the fastest lap of the season at Talladega, just incredible, Granted, it was in the draft. He was probably at the back sucking up to a car at full speed, and anyone could have run the fastest lap. But you know what? You can never take that away from Parker Kligerman, because I hope he has a plaque that like even he had made at home to just tell people he was the fastest.
No, I hope a sponsor made that for him. Not even like, like if there was an award to be the fastest driver of the year, but like if one of his sponsors was like, Parker, we're proud of what you did and how it broke social media for maybe 2 minutes or 30 seconds. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. To me, it's one of those things that as a stat, it's there, but it just shows that there's not much going on with TRD anymore. And no offense to TRD, it's just because the way everything has worked out in the last 5 years, it's mainly Toyota is mainly Joe Gibbs Racing in the Cup Series. In the Xfinity Series, it's predominantly still Joe Gibbs Racing. And in the Truck Series, it's a lot of Kyle Busch and a lot of other teams, but with Joe Gibbs power. And,
well, no, they're all using the
Elmore
excuse me.
Now, yeah, everyone's Elmore. So what was Triad for quite a number of years in the Truck Series is gone. I remember that being huge, especially like when Todd Bodine was dominating in like 2010. It was like, oh, I got to think Triad. They're gone now. Triad.
Also, those things you're hearing outside, those are not gunshots in my street. Those are fireworks, because it's Victoria Day, so people are setting off fireworks.
Right.
It's a thing people do. My neighborhood's very safe.
Fireworks aren't that safe.
No, they're not. But you can only buy fireworks in this country twice a year. They don't sell them all the time like they do in Pennsylvania and stuff. Like, you can only buy them for like 7 days around Victoria Day in May and 7 days around Canada Day in July. Fun fact about Canada. So, because we value safety in this country. Other than that, I don't think Toyota's ever raced in the Pinty Series. They have not. So the Pinty Series is Chevy, Ford, and Dodge. And Dodge has huge factory support in the Pinty Series. Huge. They sponsor like 6 cars.
They sponsor every race. What are you talking about?
Huge sponsorship of the Pinty Series. And I had a question with this. So I saw Jake Baskinger. He's a big supporter of ours. He tweeted that he just found out what Canadian Tire was. That it's like not tires, it's a store. And I'm like, yeah, it's like Walmart, only you can get automotive stuff. Like it's like Bass Pro Shops and Menards and an automotive store all in one, and you can get your car serviced there, right? Yeah. So it's like everything. They sell a lot of appliances and big seasonal section. Buy your Christmas trees there, all that crap. And then he said, well, what's Pinty's? And I said, Pinty's is a frozen food brand. They make like frozen chicken strips,
chicken fingers, dog,
and
like,
wings.
Like
but it's a premium brand. They're expensive. So I almost never buy them.
It's literally the good stuff that Ricky talks about every episode.
Yeah, I never buy them because they're very expensive.
Why hasn't a pepperoni brand sponsored anything in the in NASCAR Pinty Series level? I don't know what you want to call it. That's funny.
But yeah,
sorry.
No Toyotas in the Pinty Series. Although there was this weekend, they ran an iRace with Xfinity cars, and my buddy Daniel Morad drove a Toyota. And thought that was kind of cool.
That's
it's kind of like, we're kind of just rapping about Toyota. This is like kind of a very informal episode, and I like that. We just get to look back on Toyota.
You got to laugh. You got to cry with us.
Yeah, you got to.
I don't think we cried at all.
No, we really didn't.
I almost cried about Brian Baker, because it's sad.
In retrospect, or just thinking about it now, Toyota's very involved in motorsports through their TRD brand, and they still are today. In IMSA, factory supported to Lexus RCF effort, GT3 effort. They're doing that. They have Toyota Gazoo racing in WEC, winning Le Mans seemingly every year with their incredible TS808 hybrid. that is just, man, when we were at Sebring last year, just getting to see that hybrid in person was insane. And that car is smaller than like a pickup truck. And
yeah, it's weird.
Getting to see Fernando Alonso drive that car at Sebring and break the track record was incredible. And when you hear it go by, you don't hear anything. You just hear its wheels bouncing off the ground.
Actually, it's funnier because like if you're in the braking section, I think the brakes make more noise because of the regenerative power system in it. You hear that whining through that more so than you hear anything else.
It's insane. And that car was so good that WEC this past season had to introduce a form of balance of performance to slow that car down because it was just too fast. So they actually what they actually did was every time it would win, they'd add weight to it. So they literally called it success ballast. So they'd win, and it's like you now have the weight of a small child added to your car. And then by the third race of the season, the LMP2 field was like passing it. I was like, okay, we have to maybe bring it back. But Toyota's very involved in racing, and they always have been. You know, since the advent of TRD, it's great to see them. They had a factory supported F1 team for like 9 years that was weirdly very successful in their final season. Then pulled out of F1 due to a lot of it was due to the financial crisis of 2008. But you know there was just a great brand, man. And I go back to this, like James and I are like very biased towards Toyota because like we got to go to Plano last year and see their headquarters on Motorsport Day as media members, and it was unbelievable. It was just so cool to see all the cars they have there. They have the Grand Am cars. They have, what's some other? I'm so speechless because there's just so many cars there.
They had sprint cars. They had funny cars. They had drag cars. They had
Juan Pablo Montoya's Toyota
IndyCar.
Like they had everything there. It was just so cool to see, and all the drivers were there. It was just such a cool thing. And I'm like, I hope other manufacturers do this for their teams and their drivers.
Yeah, and not only that, but to me, like the biggest thing is I hope other manufacturers have the ability to archive and preserve their accolades in motorsports, because that's what Toyota did. They didn't have that facility up for very long. I think that museum has like only been open for like less than a year from what I was told when we were there. And it is open to the public, but the thing is, it's like many people don't know it exists. One, and two, it's very new. Now, a lot of people have probably done this, and I hope they do, because it's important to archive this history and this information. There's a lot of great motorsports history that could get lost here, and it's important that the brand did this. And it's crazy that they started out with a car that was mainly known as a WRC rally car in the Goodies Dash series, and came up and conquered the Cup series in basically less than a decade. I mean, geez, Toyota did a lot.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think they people got to give them more credit, you know. And now like they're absolutely dominant, you know, with Joe Gibbs Racing, and Toyota's still very involved. David Wilson, the president of TRD, you'll see him at the racetrack all the time. He was at the Rolex 24, he was at the Daytona 500. He's everywhere.
Well, you won't see him all the time at the moment because he's not essential.
Because he's non-essential. He's not one of the 900 essential
but it's okay,
members.
David, I'm not essential either, and neither is Mark. We feel your pain, David.
We're not essential.
Would you like to have a glass of wine together with all of us?
We can talk about how we're not essential. But you know what? We'll be essential again soon. So, because apparently IndyCar is going to have a race on July 4th with fans. So, we will all be allowed to go back soon. Things are trending up, folks. Continue to stay away from each other, and we'll all get through this together. Well, that's another episode of Flashback to the Track, folks. If you want to follow me on social media, you can follow me at FaxNASCAR on Twitter, where I tweet all kinds of fun NASCAR facts. If you want to follow James,
you can follow me at I Want to Believe NASCAR on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. Search it. YouTube. We make videos and do things and talk about stuff. Follow it. Old NASCAR.
Also, be sure, if you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, be sure to check us out on YouTube. All these podcasts go up in video versions in stellar HD video. We do a great job. Well, I'm tooting my own horn here, doing a great job editing the podcast. But yeah, we have a lot of fun making video podcasts. We're also making some feature-length videos now, talking about things. Check out the Strange Starters series. Just posted the most recent one about Mike Wallace last week. He had a ridiculous career. So check his out. Working on a few more of those and other video ideas, and we're always texting each other video ideas and talking about things and having a lot of fun, which is really the main thing. Having a lot of fun talking about NASCAR. And you know what, guys? Thanks for listening, and thanks for watching, and we really appreciate it. We will see you next week.
Bye. Send us $5 if you want us to make a documentary.